Good morning, everybody, and thanks for watching. In my travels this spring, I've been getting a repeated question from folks. They're asking about the wind, the trends kind of over the last few years. Has it been getting windier? And then has this year and this spring been windy compared to our climatological average? And I guess speaking about that travel, if the background looks different in this video here, it's because I'm in a hotel right now. I'm actually at the Wisconsin Dells at an event at one of the water parks here. And so if I move, I tend to move a lot in these videos. If you get a peek of, maybe I have to move my microphone. There's a large giraffe behind me here. So if you do see that giraffe, that's why that's there. It's kind of neat. The kids love it, so it's fine with me. But regardless, in my travels around the Midwest and other places here, people have been talking about the wind, and we actually had data now out from NOAA that says that this past March, what you're looking at here, was one of the windiest, if not the windiest, Marches that we've seen in modern memory, on modern record here. Just about everybody in the continental U.S., let alone the Midwest, the Mid-South, down through portions of the Southern Plains, up into the Mid-Atlantic, then over west into the Western U.S., it has been windier. And I was thinking about the reason for this. Can we explain why this spring in the U.S. has been so much windier? And I think you have to kind of go back to first principles a bit here and think, well, what makes wind in the atmosphere? Now, we know that pressure gradient force does that. So where you have areas of high pressure near low pressure, that's going to make more wind. That's why we track these low pressure systems all year long. That's why at the end of March, every time one of those came through, we talked about wind advisories and high wind warnings and red flag warnings. But at the same time, what makes, right, you just keep going down the line. What makes those low pressures, what makes those high pressure gradient force situations? I think when you ask that question, the next investigation has to be temperature differences. Where are there areas on the globe, or in the U.S. specifically, where we have warm temperatures near cold temperatures driving that imbalance between the two? The Earth is pretty good about counteracting imbalances, about equalizing them. And its best way to do that is with wind. And I was thinking about this across March. So I took the drought monitor map almost exactly a month ago. This drought monitor will be updated here in April, probably right at the end of the recording of this video, frustratingly. But if we go back a month to April, this is the March 11th drought monitor. And see, we're pretty dry across the continental U.S., relatively speaking. We're dry across the southern portions, the central, and then the northern plains, and then some other areas of patchy dryness that we've been talking about. Now, I think the dry air played a role in the south. It allowed the continent to warm up quicker in some of the southern U.S. portions. We had a warmer interior U.S. earlier in March than we typically would, and that holds true. If we looked at that same NOAA data for winds for temperature, we'd see an elevated March temperature pattern throughout the U.S. If we also think about dry air, it tends to allow the atmosphere in kind of these warm, sunny days to mix air further down. So if we have stronger winds aloft in the atmosphere, and we've talked about this a few times in March and some of these high wind days, if there are stronger winds kind of just off the surface, if we're dry and we're sunny, we're able to mix some of those down, and we have some of those kind of clear air windier days. And we certainly saw plenty of those intermixed with a lot of the severe weather. So I think that probably played a role here as well. I think the bigger piece of this, though, is just ultimately we were warm. We had warm sea surface temperatures to our south and east in the Gulf of Mexico. You can see that here. In fact, let me get my brush up, make this more clear where I'm looking at. If we just kind of zoom in to portions of the Gulf of Mexico, western Atlantic here, very warm sea surface temperatures there. So warm here and dry, warm here and dry. And Canada still had its snowpack going into March. It's some sporadic areas of snow up in the northern plains as well. And if we just look at the whole globe, averaged over the last 30 days, the largest temperature differences, that is, where can we find anomalous warm temperatures near anomalous cold temperatures on this map? And it's over North America. You can see the central U.S., the same areas we were just talking about, warm over the interior, portions of the southern and central plains, portions of the Mississippi River Valley, and relatively cold over Canada, over that snowpack. So you had a large temperature difference between the two. What's the atmosphere going to do with these imbalances? It's going to try to equalize them. It's going to mix them up, if you will, and it's going to do that with wind and these low pressure systems. So if we just jump over and look at the same last 30 days from this NOAA data here for low pressure anomalies, well, we see this big minimum in pressure here right over the central U.S., right kind of between that temperature gradient. And there's your storm track, there's where the atmosphere is going to want to produce those low pressure systems, produce all those high wind warnings. And that's what we saw a lot of, I think, over the last 30 days around the same time. So it has been windier to answer that question. In fact, it's been significantly windier than what we typically expect in the spring, and it speaks to some of the concerns that we're talking about: warm Atlantic Ocean temperatures, drought in the central and southern plains, and those are things that we're going to have to think about going into summer. Now, as we've gone into April here, if we just look at these same kind of metrics over the last 7 days, I'm going to pick on this low pressure anomaly chart here. Over the last 7 days, we've lost that low pressure minimum anomaly here in the central U.S. We still at times had that strong Bermuda high. This has now waned just in the last few days, but averaged over the last 7. This actually includes the Mid-South flooding event. So this is what was pumping that moisture in. But it was running into, for the first time, some high pressure centered here across the central plains, and that's what allowed this to just park itself right in between at this kind of saddle point. Eric talked about how these areas of lower pressure, these pressure troughs, is where these systems just kind of come through repeatedly. We saw that in the Mid-South. Now that has shifted out of the way here, in this high pressure system is dominating more so here this week in April. And it's for that reason that, for the first time in a while, if we just look at the all hazards map here, April 10th, valid is about 5 a.m. I'm going to update this. Let's see if we can get it to, there we go, a little bit before 6 a.m. Central Time. And we do have the red flag warnings with the low pressure system moving in off the northern plains here, but I don't think I see a single wind advisory on this map, which is a huge change from if you watched any of these videos in March. Pull one up, and I can almost assure you that there was a wind advisory or high wind warning somewhere in the U.S. every single morning. Now, if we do look over at the surface winds, obviously, given what we just talked about, lighter here today. If we look over near Bermuda, Bermuda is actually on this map here. Little white speck. It's going to be hard to see in the recording, I know. It's on here, but what we don't see around Bermuda is this big, strong Bermuda high pressure system. Actually, if anything, the pressure trough has now moved off the east coast of the U.S. We have two weaker low pressure systems, what we kind of call a double-barreled low, moving through the Midwest here this morning. This has brought some rain through portions of the central and eastern Corn Belt, some rain into the Appalachians now, and we have this kind of backside piece to it. So if you look closely, there's another area of low pressure system just behind it, and this could be an organization for showers later today as that moves through Illinois and Indiana and through parts of the central Corn Belt today. Now, over the last 24 hours, with that system moving through, we did see some measurable precipitation in Illinois, Indiana, portions of Wisconsin, along the Ohio River Valley into the eastern Corn Belt. Some of these values are a little bit low in the metros that we plot here, so I believe we're plotting Champaign, Indianapolis here, and so 0.6, but some of these values are actually a little bit over that, so this kind of belies the amounts a little bit. I think we got a little bit closer up toward 0.2, 0.3 in some of these locations, and can't rule out in some of these, underneath some of the stronger showers here, got up closer to 1/3 of an inch. So kind of frustratingly, we've had these small rainfall events pop up here in the forecast, just enough to kind of keep us out of the fields for some folks trying to get in there. And we'll have a few more of these to deal with over the next kind of week or two, but definitely still in this 10-day quiet period. We've been talking about this 10-day on, 10-day off. While we're in the quiet period, we still have just some of these small rain chances to talk about. We'll get into those in just a second here. If we jump over and look at the radar across the entire U.S., I'll make that, I think it's about as big as it's going to get. We can see those showers and precipitation moving off into Kentucky, portions of the eastern Ohio River Valley, West Virginia today. That second lobe, if you will, of that low pressure system on the backside of this here, moving through southern Minnesota, and that's going to be tracking further to the southeast today. Again, rain chances, we're talking anywhere from 1/10 of an inch. If you get underneath one of these stronger showers, for half an hour to an hour, we might be talking about something closer to 1/3 of an inch in the Midwest here today. Temperatures this morning, we don't see widespread frost and freeze risk here. We have some mid to upper 30s here across Illinois and Indiana. But you can see we've lost that 32-degree Fahrenheit contour in portions of the Mid-South. We've actually warmed up quickly now across that same area. You're talking 60 degrees Fahrenheit in Nashville as of this morning. Very different morning than what we just saw yesterday. If we look at the maximum temperature forecast today from the National Weather Service, as these systems kind of curl up here in the east, we remain cold underneath the clouds and the rain here across portions of the Midwest and the Mid-Atlantic, warming up in the west, warming up in the Central Plains. Tomorrow, that temperature contrast is only more highlighted. You're talking up near 80s in the portions of the northern high plains. Again, 70s kind of in the interior U.S., 80s in Texas. And then as that backside piece of the low comes down Friday, it's going to be dragging down some colder air with it. And we see the influence of that Friday and then ultimately Saturday. Now, I'm going to jump over quickly and show you Saturday morning overnight lows. So here's Thursday, Friday morning, trying to get down there into that freezing line here in southern Michigan, staying out of it through the rest of Illinois and Indiana. Maybe Wisconsin here, central Wisconsin, getting down toward that 32 degree Fahrenheit line. But it's as we get into Saturday morning now, this is April 12th, you can see that freezing line. We've really kind of pulled it all the way in through central Illinois into central Indiana, portions of western Ohio, and maybe even just south of the Ohio River here into western Kentucky. We'll see. This is Saturday morning. This, again, we're kind of waiting in a lot of these areas: western Kentucky, central and southern Indiana, central and southern Illinois. We're thinking, I'll include western Ohio in this. We're watching these, have we reached our last freeze for the year in 2025? It's possible. If this Saturday event doesn't get quite as deep, if it trends 1 or 2 degrees warmer leading up to it, and we miss that next date on Wednesday as well. I'll just tell you, Wednesday of next week we're watching as well. We're on that kind of last frost watch, absolutely. So we go into Monday, warming up. Tuesday of next week we start to see a cold front make its influence known across the northern plains. And then again, Wednesday morning, see that frost and freeze risk returning to the Midwest. We'll take a closer look at that in just a second. I do want to double back. We're going to take you back and show you that maximum temperature forecast. This is for Saturday. I'm going to take this into Sunday. We see this warm up now spreading into the Midwest, looking at a nicer weekend here across much of the central U.S. So we go into Monday, that now overspreading the central and eastern U.S., Texas included, and then all the way up toward Maine with warmer temperatures, spring-like conditions finally after some of the round of cold weather here. But again, that cold front that I just talked about next week, making its presence known on Tuesday, and then Wednesday bringing temperatures back down. So this kind of roller coaster of temperatures continues. It is April, that's expected, and then potentially bottoming out Wednesday of next week in the Midwest. We'll have to watch the potential for frost and freeze in some of these areas. We've looked at this before. This is the ECMWF ensemble looking at the probabilities of temperatures below 32 degrees Fahrenheit. I'm going to fast forward this quickly. There's Saturday morning, and you can see I'm kind of dragging in through Michigan and into central and southern Indiana. So this is kind of the area we're watching Saturday morning for the potential for frost. You can see that highlighted well in portions of Wisconsin, east central Illinois, much of Indiana, and portions at least of western Ohio. Warming up on Sunday, less of a frost and freeze risk. By Tuesday, you can see the influence of that cold front getting pulled in on the northern plains. And then ultimately Wednesday morning, seeing frost and freeze risk increase across portions of central Illinois, Indiana, Wisconsin, northern and eastern Iowa, and through much of Ohio. And we'll see, again, this line here could get dragged further to the south, or far enough away it could trend further to the north, but we can see there's definitely something to watch next Wednesday. That pushes further east on Thursday. By Friday, exiting further north. And then we're just kind of waiting and watching, and we're not seeing, there hasn't been a huge change in the forecast right now to make us believe we're staring at another decent frost or freeze probability later in April. And I'll get into that in just a bit in this video. We're going to talk about the seasonal forecast at the end of this. We're going to talk about what the MJO might be telling us. I can tell you now here on Thursday morning, there's a few more signals coming, I think, from the MJO and some of the long-range forecasting than we've had in April so far. So if you want to jump ahead, you can. I'll be talking about that in just a few slides here. Now, before I do that, I do want to mention that here today we do have some severe weather risk. We've been in this lull here, thankfully, after the flurry of severe weather events, the very fast start to the year at the end of March and early April. We do have a hail and slight wind risk here across portions of the middle Mississippi River Valley into the mid-south and then the southeast here, kind of starting around the boot heel of Missouri and then quickly spreading southeast of there. Now, fortunately, very, very little tornado threat with this one today. I'll talk about why that is in just a second here. So, not even a tornado contour here from the Storm Prediction Center. The wind up to 15% risk. The hail here, similarly, kind of that 15%. Now, I think today, I wouldn't be surprised if it's a more prolific hail producer in some of these areas here. I'm not necessarily expecting big damaging hail, but I do think a lot of the storms that do fire here this afternoon will be producing hail. So I'll be surprised if at the end of the day we don't see a number of, hopefully small hail reports in this corridor here. And I say that because I'm going to show you, this is the simulated radar forecast from the 3-kilometer NAM. Looks like that's about as big as I can make it. Ooh, let's go back to there. There we go. This is valid here as of this morning. Let's make it 6 a.m., kind of right when I'm recording this video. And you can see those showers that we talked about in that radar mosaic earlier that I had pulled up. Now, as we go through the day today, I'm going to take us toward lunchtime. 8 a.m., 9 a.m. can see maybe some kind of weak showers and storms moving through eastern Tennessee here and through this morning. Now to 2 p.m., 3 p.m., 4 p.m. eastern. This would be 3 p.m. central. See storms firing along the delta here in southern and southeastern Missouri, portions of eastern Arkansas, moving very quickly now. Some of these look, a little bit more on the potent side. This is 6 p.m., 7 p.m. through portions of western Tennessee. Memphis metro is certainly in line of this hail and wind risk today. And then pushing into Alabama, central and eastern Mississippi overnight. This all the way now 10 p.m. Central Time tonight. Now, I say hail risk because if you remember from last week, I think on Thursday, we broke down the tornado outbreak from Wednesday. And we talked about how when you're looking for tornadoes and forecasting those, we're looking for rapid turning or changing of the winds with height, especially kind of right off the surface. And with hail, it's a little bit different. The ingredients for hail and tornadoes are not exactly the same. And strangely, kind of over the last 5 years, we found with hail that it wants changing of the winds with height, but largely what we call unidirectionally. And what I mean by that is the winds, as they change with height for a good hailstorm, tend to be in the same direction, just increasing in strength. So while you'll have weaker winds at the surface, as you go aloft, they'll be stronger, but pointed in that same direction. And if we just look at winds just off the surface here, valid for this afternoon for the Mid-South, they are out of the northwest toward the southeast, we call northwesterly flow. Well, let's go above that and look at the winds at 500 millibars. They are largely out of the northwest toward the southeast, that northwesterly flow, same direction, but much stronger. And then let's even go up to the jet stream level winds here at 250 millibars, out of the northwest, largely the same direction, and even stronger. So we have this increasing wind shear with height, that is stronger winds, but it's not changing direction. And that tends to be, we've found, a pretty prolific signature for hail produce. Now, the storms aren't expected to be terribly tall today and not too vigorous, so that's why we're not expecting them to be too strong in terms of the hail size, but I can't rule out some widespread hail reports and maybe something getting up toward ping pong size, which can start to cause some damage, so something to watch for. Now, beyond that, looking at precipitation chances, I'm going to make this forecast valid here. This is Thursday afternoon. You can see some of the showers percolating under the backside of this low pressure system here in southern Illinois. We just talked about the potential storms here. This is now 7 p.m. Thursday through the Mid-South and the Southeast, that exiting overnight into more portions of the Southeast, the Carolinas, the Mid-Atlantic, looking at some weak shower chances here. Potentially by Friday morning, increasing in coverage here across the Carolinas, portions of the Mid-Atlantic on Friday afternoon. And now Friday evening, continual coverage here across portions of Maryland, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, continuing into Friday evening. Potentially looking at some showers transitioning over toward a wintry mix here in portions of New England. We'll be keeping an eye on that. This would be Saturday morning before that system exits on early Sunday morning, but kind of parked just off the coast here, perhaps bringing some showers into portions of New England. Now, as I'm talking about that, if we look further north across the U.S., the northern plains up near the Canadian border, see our next system riding over the top of this ridge here in the west, focused on portions of the Dakotas. This is now afternoon and then into the evening on Sunday, continuing to organize here overnight. See that system wrapping up into Ontario on Canada. This is afternoon, lunchtime 1 p.m. on Monday. And you can see that this has a southern component to it, trying to bring a weak precipitation chance to the central Corn Belt here, portions of Missouri, Illinois, Indiana, potentially increasing coverage Monday evening across portions of the eastern Corn Belt with some shower and potentially storm activity. On Monday afternoon, that system exiting toward the east across New England. Let's take us into Wednesday morning. If you remember from last time we talked, there was this chance of a potential trough sneaking under the ridge here in the western U.S., getting into the central plains. The models have been bouncing around with that, but at least today here this morning, the ECMWF still has this trough sneaking underneath, producing this weak low pressure system here across portions of Oklahoma, Kansas, Missouri, and Arkansas. This would be Wednesday afternoon, and probably can't rule out a thunderstorm threat with this, as it is, we're in mid-April at this point, April 16th. And then lingering overnight, it's a weaker trough sneaking underneath. It doesn't have a lot of flow to kick it out of there, so it's not going to be a super fast-moving system. So that's why by Thursday morning, it's still in Arkansas, portions of Missouri and Mississippi. That extends off to the southeast as we go through the day on Thursday, and then this other piece wrapping up here into the Midwest on Thursday as well. So not too much precipitation out of a lot of these systems. Now, underneath a few local areas, we could see some higher amounts, but they're just regular enough to kind of keep us a little bit concerned about field work in some of these areas. So it's a little bit frustrating considering we're slowly kind of warming up across the central and eastern U.S. here over the next kind of 7 to 10 days, but we do have just these lingering weak precipitation chances to keep our eye on. That system potentially curls up. We're getting way out into the end of next week, so I'll stop it there out to April 19th at this point. I'm going to take you through the accumulated precip here. We'll talk about those kind of weaker precipitation amounts. So I'm going to take us through the day here today. Let's do this is valid for about midnight Friday, so midnight tonight. And you can see, despite the severe weather potential that we talked about across portions of the southeast, despite those showers wrapping up in the backside here today in the Midwest, the values here in terms of precipitation totals are low. We're talking anywhere from a tenth to kind of a quarter of an inch in a lot of these locations. Can't rule out higher amounts here in the Appalachians, the Ohio River Valley, but we're still only talking about half an inch of precipitation. Now, the coverage of that increases in the Carolinas and the Mid-Atlantic tomorrow. We saw that just kind of spin up here. And so you can see values approaching 1 inch in areas there. But for the rest of the central and Midwest, as this low kind of spins through, not talking about appreciable amounts here, more so over here east of the Appalachians. Now, as we go through the day Sunday, we can see that next system coming into view here, starting to lay down precipitation here across North Dakota. So take this in through Monday afternoon. I'm waiting for that next system to pop up here. If you remember that one in Missouri, Illinois, and Indiana. And it did. It just came through here Monday afternoon, and we only increased those precipitation amounts by maybe a tenth of an inch. So again, a weak system coming through Monday evening. Now we're expecting that next system to flare up here in Oklahoma, Arkansas, Kansas. There it is. See slower moving storms with this one, showers and storms, putting down greater precipitation amounts. Because it's moving through slower, we now have an inch of rain rather than a tenth of an inch to talk about in areas that moves through anywhere from half an inch or more. And then finally, with that northern piece of the system wrapping up into the Midwest, we see, again, small increases in precipitation here. So 2, 3, 4 shots of precip to watch here over the next kind of 7 to 10 days across portions of the Midwest and the Mid-South here. This one we'll have to keep an eye on. This one's been bouncing around. It's variable, but with the slow-moving storms has higher potential for, one, severe weather, and then part of that is greater precipitation as well. Now, as we look further into the forecast, I mentioned we do have, I think, more signals in the long range to go off of. I'm going to show you that in just a second here. One, if we just look at the 7-day maximum temperatures, just averaged up over 7 days, and then there are anomalies from the National Weather Service here. You can see the split, warm west. We've been talking for a while about the ridging in the western U.S. The storm's kind of coming over that. That's why we have that system next week to talk about. It's coming over this here on Sunday and Monday. Now, Wednesday, we do have a system coming underneath that ridge that we'll have to keep an eye on. We just went through that. But in the long range, let's look out 5 to 10 days from the ECMWF, from the GFS, from the AFS. It continues with that pattern, cool in portions of the eastern Corn Belt and the Northeast, warm out west. But it's really after that where we've had quite a few questions. This is April 20th through the 25th. And the ECMWF ENS has finally gone over pretty clearly warm across much of the continental U.S. over that same time span. Now, if we look at the GFS, starting to come into agreement. In fact, pretty strong agreement, widespread warmth across the continental U.S. as we get into that 3rd and 4th week of April. If we come down here and look at the AIFS, this is an operational model run, so it's going to pick out some more details in this pattern. It doesn't just put kind of a broad level warm swath across much of the U.S. We see some cold lingering here in the west and in portions of the Carolinas, but we can generally see that agreement of that ridging less so dominant out west and more broad across the interior, the central portion of the country. And I think why we've kind of come into better agreement in the long range is we're finally seeing the MJO show its hand a little bit more. So in the forecast that I gave you at the end of last week, what Eric's been talking about this week, is the MJO has just been in null space. It hasn't sent a clear signal, but finally now it's looking like as we get into the 15th, 16th, 17th of April, that's what we're looking at here in the forecast, some better agreement that we're heading into phase 7, potentially phase 8, getting into the end of April, maybe even early May. And that at least gives us a clue of what we're looking for. And I'll tell you now, when we look at phase 7 and that kind of 3rd to 4th week of April, we do see a pretty good historical signal here for ridging across the central and eastern U.S., even up into Canada. This is the kind of highlight the Great Lakes here. This red color showing ridging potential over the central U.S. Now, ridging over the central U.S., that's one ingredient for warmth. Are we going to get a Bermuda high that's going to help pump engulf moisture? If we get that and we get some weak troughing across the western U.S., well, that's been our concern for kind of a gangbusters return to plains or kind of classical tornado alley outbreaks of severe weather. So that's what we're watching closely. We're kind of checking off this ingredient that we've returned flow, we've returned warmth back to the central U.S. Are we going to get enough Gulf moisture? And are we going to get systems just coming off the west enough? Are we going to get some weak troughing here? Or maybe a component of the subtropical jet to feel systems coming off here in West Texas, Central Oklahoma, and Kansas. Now, that would obviously bring a severe weather threat, but it would likely bring significant precipitation. It's hard to get severe weather without significant precipitation. And I'm kind of jumping the gun here. I'm taking this forecast of the jet stream level winds, I'm trying to make it as big as I can here, all the way out to April 23rd. So immediately, this is, as far as a forecast, we're looking well beyond kind of our 10-day window here. But it does paint that scenario, at least here from the ensemble, from the ECMWF. And what I mean by that is, with the MJ moving through phase 7, maybe even to phase 8, we're seeing this resurgence of the subtropical jet stream. You can draw a line south of Hilo, Hawaii here, all the way to Cabo, and then across portions of Texas. That's linking up very well with the polar jet stream, which is putting this troughing across portions of Reno, Nevada. And the polar branch of the jet stream now flowing over that and ridging over the central U.S. This has pretty two clear signals to me. One, warmth across the central eastern U.S., maybe some decent planting conditions here across portions of the central and eastern U.S., depending on the rainfall situation as we get into late April. But one, with that subtropical jet stream coming over the top of the elevation here, some of the drier weather concerns here. I mean, this paints a pretty scary scenario, I would think, for your kind of classic tornado alley here. Portions of Texas, Kansas, Oklahoma, some areas that have been very dry. So it's this ever-present double-edged sword that we're fighting here, right? We're looking for precipitation chances. We're trying to do it without widespread severe weather. And in late April and early May, it's hard to do both of those. If we jump over and look at the ECMWF ENS precipitation, this is a 72-hour rolling window. I'm going to take this back. Let's make this valid here as of the next 72 hours. So this takes us all the way to Sunday. So we talked about the precipitation chances here over the central and eastern U.S. You see those chances pick up here across the upper Midwest. We talked about that quick hitting system on Monday, moving across the central and eastern Corn Belt, those amounts being on the lower side. Watching that next system potentially spin up Wednesday. We talked about highlighting that area in Missouri, Arkansas, and then pushing through the southeast, maybe up into the plains. You're seeing that kind of wider swath there around it, albeit weaker. Saturday, Sunday, Monday. Now we're all the way to April 21st. And as we get into the 22nd and the 23rd, boy, did you see the 23rd? Watch in the southern plains here. See that shift back west. 72-hour precipitation amounts getting up toward, a half an inch or more at this point. And this far out in the forecast, this is a pretty good signal that this area might be turning active in that 3rd to 4th week of April here. We'll have to watch this closely for a severe weather threat as well. This is a pretty decent signal now in the long range from some of these models. We've seen this pop up in the weeklies, so now I'm jumping over and showing you the weeklies. This is the extended ECMWF forecast, so a little bit different than the last one I just showed you. Again, it has that precipitation signal. It's still there, albeit further south. So whether these systems kind of wrap up and scoot across the upper Midwest, or they kind of stick to the mid-south or the southeast, that's an open question, but our confidence is increasing that we're going to be having some of these lee troughs, severe weather, warmer weather across portions of the central U.S. to end April. We see that in the weeklies as well if we look at the temperature anomalies, and we're still seeing that kind of cold bias here because of all the precipitation here in the mid-south. We jump over and look at just, for comparison, the GFS extended forecast. Again, I think a lot of what you're seeing here is that cold bias from that rainfall that's still in the hydrology of the models here. I can tell you one thing that we look at when we're kind of thinking about severe weather in your kind of classic central U.S. scenario is a lot of these long-range models, we compare a lot of their different ensemble runs, just as we did. We showed that ECMWF ensemble here. And what this product here from NOAA here, looking at the CFS, this is a different American model that runs out very far into the forecast, which is why we like to use it for situations like this. So this model actually takes us all the way to May 23rd. And while that's beyond the scope of where we can be too confident in a forecast, at least it gives us some trends that we can kind of benchmark and work off of. And I show this because if you look over the next 7 to 10 days in the forecast, and where even is that on this kind of crazy chart? Well, this white line is now, and to the right is the forecast. Now, everything below, do you see these squares here running left to right? That's the current forecast from the system all the way out to May 23rd. So each of these boxes is a day. Everything below this line that I'm drawing are old forecasts. So all the old forecasts, which went out less further into the future, are all listed below here. So you can actually see the trend in the forecast itself over time, which is always valuable to us as forecasters. And what we can see that over the last week, over the next week in the forecast, is we've been expected to be quieter. There's that 10-day on, 10-day off signal here. So next kind of 5 to 10 days for severe weather, we're expecting a lull here. And the brightness of these squares and then that X shows us where the model's picking up on severe weather concerns in the central US. I'm going to show you that in a second here. And it also graphs these boxes here, the ones that are highlighted. And what we can see here is one that going through the next kind of 5 to 10 days, expecting a lull in the severe weather activity. As we get further out toward the end of April, so this is the 21st through the 30th, we have more precipitation chances showing up in the last few model runs. And then as we get into May, more so after that. So these are graphed here as well. You can see the line here, our moving average of these forecasts is headed in the positive direction. I think we're going to have some more to talk about in terms of that severe weather conversation as we get into the middle part of the country. Now, that's going to play a role in planting. If we're warmer, we're going to be trying to get a crop in the ground and get some field work done thereafter. And if that severe weather wraps up into the Central Plains and moves toward the northeast as it's done in the past years, we'll be talking about potentially severe weather in Iowa or Illinois and then planting window concerns. If it stays in portions of the south or the southeast, well, likely going to be see more of those concerns there, and maybe on the backside of some of these systems under that scenario, colder weather in the northern plains or the upper Midwest. We'll tackle that when we get to it. Those details just aren't clear. As I kind of wrap up here, we've talked about all the latest seasonal forecasts this week. I don't want to mention them too much more. I'll say this. I've been talking to some folks here in the northern plains in the upper Midwest here just over the last few days, and the latest NMME model which came out, which was pretty stark in terms of that drought conversation. I'm showing the June, July, August precipitation departures here, and rightfully so, and I don't think it's wrong to be concerned about some of the drought situation. I will say this, though, about this forecast, and we have some doubts about some of these forecasts. We've explained that just in terms of the sea surface temperature conversation. But even if this forecast that I'm showing you here for June, July, August from the NMME verified exactly, this exact map came true, all that this map is saying is that the precipitation rate over the summer months, that is June, July, and August, if we look at the color contours here, this first kind of beige color here is minus 10%. The second one, this orange one here, is minus 20%. So over the 3 summer months, we're 20% below average for precipitation for these areas here across the central and eastern U.S. Now, I'm going to pick on Sioux Falls for a moment, kind of right in the middle of this, the upper Midwest and the northern plains here. Sioux Falls in summer, in June, averages about 4 inches of rain. In July, I think that drops down to about 3 1/4, 3 1/2. And then August, maybe even slightly less than that, but certainly still over 3 inches. So Sioux Falls is looking at 4, 3 inches. Make it easy, 10 inches of rain in the summer months. If you're 20% below, right, we're looking at 8 inches of rain. I could make a pretty good argument. In fact, I will make the argument that if I could take that 8 inches of rain and distribute it how I wanted to across those summer months, I could make a fantastic crop in Sioux Falls, right? If maybe, I kind of hold it off in June, allow some dry weather to build in, get some field work done, get some sun in, get GDDs up, and then in July, pollination. I put the rain on then, keep it going through early August, frequent enough as needed, and then keep it a little bit drier at the end of August to help us start drying down. I can make a fantastic crop. Now, I'm not saying that's exactly the scenario that's going to play out. That would take quite a bit of luck. But just because we're at that 80%, it doesn't mean there's going to be this drier drought forecast. What it does do is it increases the risk on a broad scale. It increases the risk, at least looking at this forecast, from Fort Stockton or Fort Worth, Texas, all the way up through Bismarck and portions of western and northern Minnesota. The chance that you fall on the unluckier side of that precipitation distribution is increased based on what we're seeing from some of these seasonal forecasts. But it's not to say that even if they verified, right, we're going to see widespread crop issues. So that's just something to think about as we paste some of these maps, and they're covered with beige and dark colors. Now, if I showed you this picture and we were, minus 40% or minus 60% contours all over the Midwest, all over the northern plains, central U.S., yeah, this conversation would change. And hopefully not, but we could get there as we get in through May. If May stays dry and some of these forecasts shift further and further south, right, our concern is going to increase. But right now, there's still a lot of nuance to this conversation, and we'll have to figure it out as we go. I will say one thing when we're distributing precipitation throughout the year. One thing that is real that we do have to account for is the current drought situation. Now, this map is valid as of last week. It's going to update. Again, I mentioned this at the beginning, kind of frustrating, likely right at the end of this video. But regardless, expecting some improvements here across the Corn Belt, the Carolinas, and the Southeast. But where we have the existing drought, that is portions of the northern plains and portions of the southern plains, we'll have to watch that going through April. Where are we going to get the worst drought this year? Again, it's kind of frustratingly, it's likely going to be in the areas where we're having it build up now. That just tends to be the case in some of those worst years. So watching areas here in the northern plains for precipitation chances. I mentioned that the precipitation forecast looking a bit rosier, I think, in the central and the southern plains here as we get into late April. We'll have to see how much that verifies. But regardless, going into this year, these are some areas that we'll have to keep a close eye on. Thanks for watching here today. Eric will be back and talk with you tomorrow morning, and I'll see you again next week.